Part of the thing about the design process is like having constraints forces you to focus. And so even if you're a merchandising team or an internal team, if you're thinking about your customer space too broadly, then you can't focus and you end up trying to like serve too many needs and you're not meeting any.
Let's dive into the discovery workshop.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little bit biased on the agency side because I think that workshops, one of the really key pieces of doing a workshop is sort of having this non-biased facilitation element. And so, especially when you are going through something like what we are experiencing now, where, pretty much every problem you thought you had has to be completely reframed, completely redesigned. The research is all out the window because all of the human behavior around us is just completely different now. And so I think that having a third party or having somebody who's fairly neutral is really important in that kind of circumstance, because you just don't really know what kind of biases that you're bringing to the table. And especially for like a short workshop, like there are things that you can do in a workshop, especially if it's just an internally held one, where you like state or write out or otherwise document any potential assumptions or biases you might have before or like at the beginning of the workshop. So like just the act of putting it all out there, like we are assuming this, or we are biased towards this particular kind of customer, can go a long way to kind of sorting out potential threads that could be problematic when you start to approach your outcomes and you get a little bit more into when you're doing that double diamond approach, as you're kind of coming to the end of the second diamond. You don't want the information or the data that you've put into the process at the beginning to be flawed in some way. And so,
Any example that you could think of the top of your head?
yeah, I mean, I think that like oftentimes, especially in e-commerce, people, internal teams or merchandising teams, I worked for like a large department store at one point, and that they kind of have the attitude that, we're serving anybody that wants to buy, because our inventory is, they had a product catalog of like 250,000 pieces of inventory. It is a massive product catalog. Part of the thing about the design process is like having constraints forces you to focus. And so even if you're a merchandising team or an internal team, if you're thinking about your customer space too broadly, then you can't focus and you end up trying to like serve too many needs and you're not meeting any. And so if you state a lot of assumptions about like our customer is like the everyman, and then you can kind of work backwards from there. Okay, like what does the everyman mean? Actually, maybe our customer is a fashion forward millennial based in the Northeast. You might not want to be so demographically specific, or, somebody who maybe wants clothing that is transitional from day to night because they're very active in like the urban space, or you can kind of frame it as things like that so that you can sort of narrow down and come to a stylistic direction for the brand that'll like really reflect on the homepage, that might be appealing to like a wide variety of people, but it's so appealing because it's clearly focused and narrowed and there are boundaries to it.
So I like that you mentioned that, and there's one thing that I wanted to mention in same regard is times have changed.
Yeah.
So digital transformation has been happening for the past 20 years, and businesses went from cataloging, online cataloging, to what used to be important, right? You needed to get online, you need to get your catalog digitized, you offered it up as an e-commerce. But now everyone's basically caught up, right? Everybody understands digital cataloging.
Yeah, everybody,
Now,
more so in the consumer space though. That's definitely not the case in the B2B space.
correct, agreed. So, but on it, specifically in the consumer space, brands need to understand that they have to start the next level of transformation, which is going from cataloging into experience. Right. So how do you generate like a user experience that essentially you would provide in retail online? There's a good like reference I keep bringing up is, people invest a lot of money into retail. They find a location, they pay high rents for where a lot of foot traffic is, where you have a lot of visibility. You spend a
Mm-hmm.
lot of money renovating the actual retail space. You buy
Mm-hmm.
showcases, you put up, signage, you put up all this stuff, you invest into inventory, you display this inventory perfectly, right? And there's a lot of retail stores that actually go through the motion of
Mm-hmm.
consistently changing the
Mm-hmm.
view of their showcases and displays,
Mm-hmm.
just so that it's always an exciting and new
Mm-hmm.
experience, right? And when customers come in into retail, you have salespeople. You have people that actually ask you questions. They guide you. They
Mm-hmm.
welcome you. They put you in the right direction. They can answer any questions you
Mm-hmm.
have. The failure became that when these retailers started to go to digital catalogs,
Mm-hmm.
that entire experience died.
Mm-hmm.
That experience became a self-serve experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so to a number of clients, I've been saying that imagine if you did all that, you
Mm-hmm.
invested all this money into retail,
Yeah.
and then you spend tons of money marketing, and now you
Mm-hmm.
have customers coming into your store, and you're sitting back in your chair all the way at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the store by the cash register,
Mm-hmm.
waiting for someone to figure it out on their own to then
Mm-hmm.
put your product to just give you a
Mm-hmm.
credit card.
Yeah.
This is what majority of
Mm-hmm.
websites feel like today.
Yeah.
So we have to talk about that digital
Mm-hmm.
transformation from digital cataloging
Mm-hmm.
to digital experiences,
Mm-hmm.
which I think we're the perfect timing today to actually take that step back,
Mm-hmm.
run a discovery workshop, and figure out, okay, how are we providing that
Mm-hmm.
in-store experience online?
Yeah.
Or at least how can we get as close as possible to the
Mm-hmm.
interactions, to the presentations, to the communication, lots to do with content creation,
Yeah.
lots to do with
So
message,
much.
proper call to actions,
Yeah.
proper user journeys.
Yeah.
So I think that's very important
Mm-hmm.
case point to
Mm-hmm.
remember
Yeah.
when people start to ask, well, why do I need to do a discovery workshop?
Yeah.
This is why.
Yeah. I think there are kind of two ways that I would tackle that problem, kind of going back to some of the things that you mentioned earlier in your comment. The first is that, like, internally when I'm talking to the stakeholders as part of like the discovery process, you're kind of bringing in the different groups that are involved in both retail and online. You're having conversations about how they do their job. This is part of uncovering discovery information. Oftentimes, like, those groups don't even like guest services doesn't necessarily even know what merchandising is doing, and operations doesn't really know what IT is doing, but their jobs all really intersect. And this is where you can start to do some initial like service design work to figure out like how are all those different teams, how are their activities surfacing up to the customer experience, and where does that fall on a timeline in terms of like the overall e-commerce experience, from learning about the brand, initial shopping on the site, all the way through to purchase. And then so you can kind of see where there might be some overlap and some opportunities to like build up the experience. But also as part of that discovery process, I would try to surface where, like, what is the relationship between retail and online? Because oftentimes what I've seen is the online is like a secondary thought. Like, the company is so focused on retail, they've done e-commerce, but they're treating it as like a box that needs to be checked. And the digital transformation there really needs to come internally. It needs to be retail and online leveling up together. They both need to have like at least an equal voice in the room and some kind of symbiotic relationship, so that they're kind of in sync together in terms of how they're merchandising, how they're tackling customer needs, how they're seeking to understand like how because customers are online shopping in your store. There isn't really like a clear divide anymore. People have these expectations, so it's like that omni-channel experience needs to be looked at as an entire ecosystem, not just as like the online as a product catalog, as you kind of mentioned. And then probably the second thing I would want to do is kind of along the lines of what I mentioned with the service delivery. But really what I would try to figure out is like, what's really special about the brand? Like, what are the things that people really cling on to? And then how can you thread that needle across the omni-channel experience? And that's where mapping is really useful, because you can map out all the brand touch points across the online and retail ecosystems, and then kind of figure out like, where are these important touch points happening? Is there any overlap between where they're happening? And then you can start to have really interesting conversations about, just brainstorming ideas to kind of figure out what are some fun ways to flex the brand that people might not necessarily be expecting, that people might perceive as clever, whatever the brand traits are that you want expressed. Creating some kind of experience map would be a really great way to start tackling where to identify those spots.
So you've mentioned a lot of interesting things, and some of the language is a little bit, UX focused.
Yeah.
I don't know if a lot of people understand that. How do we explain a little bit in
map
like
or service delivery?
correct, right?
Yeah.
These are terms that are not widely used across companies.
Yeah.
This is what we use, right? This is our language. But I want us to be very, I don't want it to sound like fancy words that are being thrown around, because each one of those statements have a lot of weight behind them, and they're all branch out into their own segments.
Yeah.
So if you can just dive in a little bit deeper, and kind of.
Sure. So, I talked about a couple of different techniques. The first is just like stakeholder discovery. And so that's really, it's just a straight up interviewing technique. It can be, again, an outside facilitator is often useful because you have somebody who's coming with like a kind of a blank slate. There are no assumptions about what any particular team is doing or their relationship with another team. But you can also do that internally. So if you're, the UX lead on a project internally, you definitely want to take some time to sit down with all of the different people on the team and maybe even like build out a RACI chart or something where you're kind of mapping what everybody's roles are. You're having conversations with them about what they're doing, and then you're just gathering information. Usually for me, what it looks like is just a big Google Doc where I'm typing up notes from the conversation. I will usually structure like some questions in advance, but they're pretty straightforward. Tell me about your typical day. What are some of the challenges that you're facing? So I do plan the questions a little bit. And if there are things that are very specific, like if I'm maybe speaking to a sales team and they have concerns about an online or an e-commerce store taking away business or taking away the opportunity to have a sales relationship, I might probe some of those sorts of things depending on how politically sensitive they are. But again, that's one of those things where having a neutral facilitator, you can kind of play naive about it a little bit. But it can also be done by an internal person. And then it's just a big document and I'm looking for patterns. I'll usually go through and pull out kind of things that I'm seeing said over and over or things that are interesting to me. Sometimes I'll use just like a numerical rating system. So if I am seeing patterns, I'll notate, I saw people say some variation on this comment 4 or 5 times. I saw people say variations on this like 2 or 3 times. And so then you can kind of get a sense of what is top of mind for certain people when you're launching a big e-commerce project. And so that's like stakeholder discovery interviews. Experience mapping, and you can do this with information that's pulled internally. Oftentimes it's done with external research from customers or some combination of both. I think sometimes we forget that we're told to do a lot of interviewing. You always want to be talking to your customers, and that's very true. But like, there are people inside your organization that know your customers as well. Like, their biases, their assumptions for sure. But like, you can also surface a lot of really important things just from talking to different stakeholders about how in their niche job, they're interacting with the customer. And you can kind of start to thread together stories about who they think the customer is. And oftentimes you might see differences. The people in guest services might have a very different perception of the customer than the people in operations because they're meeting them at different points in the experience of the purchasing experience.
I want to interject real quick. We've found success actually interviewing customer service reps.
Yeah, they know so much.
Support reps. They have the largest amount of feedback because they're boots on the ground. They deal with clients all the time. So they actually have very, very in-depth information that like even operations people or marketing people, they're not even thinking about it. But you think about, customer service is there on an empathetic level. They have to appeal, and the only time customer service gets a call if there's a problem. They're a well of information, and a lot of companies ignore to tap into it. Which I do want to add that it's really important for companies to build some sort of ticketing systems or some
Mm-hmm.
sort of CRMs that allow you to log this feedback.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of customer service calls that
Mm-hmm.
happen. People will just pick up the phone call, they'll
Mm-hmm.
respond, they'll solve the problem, but then that data never gets stored anywhere.
Yeah.
Even
And
though a lot of companies have been getting better at it,
mhm.
recording calls, but this data in the future can be utilized really well.
Yeah, and that software is getting more and more intelligent too. I mean, even working with chatbots, you can, in a lot of ways, I haven't worked on a project personally that's like this, but I'm seeing it more and more that those chatbots are getting more intelligent and they're starting to be able to provide more of not just like a customer service function, but merchandising functions as well. So if you say go to like Macy's website and you are looking for like a red knee-length skirt, sometimes a chatbot can kind of help you narrow those search results down in a way that just hitting the search button can't. So it's a way to kind of provide like a higher quality or higher touch interaction for people who aren't able to find what they want from like a traditional search feature or just from like going to a product grid.
And so this is actually part of the discovery that happens, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I asked for customer service logs all the time, customer support logs all the time during discovery. Even sometimes if you can get a hold of those binders or any kind of documentation they have for frequently asked questions, like I said, looking for those patterns and kind of checking like you're seeing this type of question over and over and over again, like you'll get that information immediately from somebody in customer support. They know where the website is not working because that's where they get calls. And if they're getting calls about it, I mean, that's maybe like just the tip of the iceberg for the problem. You could have, once you have that information and then you go look at the analytics, depending on what you have in analytics, then you might see like insane drop off from in a part of the site that you aren't even thinking about. But mostly it's happening during checkout for e-commerce. They're having credit card validation problems and they're calling customer service. Because
Right.
if they get to that point, they're pretty committed to the purchase and they're probably very frustrated. So yeah, so then like there's just to touch on experience mapping and service delivery. Those are kind of two sides of the same coin. It's just a matter of the scope of your perspective. So an experience map is like, what is the customer going through? Like, how do they learn about the brand? How do they land on your homepage? How might they what happens if they bypass your homepage? Say they're coming from like a Google shopping search and they just land on like the product description page. Are they going to be oriented? Are they going to feel like they can trust this brand? Are they finding the things that they want? So those are like different touch points throughout the process. And by kind of mapping them and having conversations about those touch points, you can kind of find out like what the customer is thinking, what kind of experience they expect to have, how well are you delivering on that expected experience? Are there any problems? In e-commerce, I did some work for an automotive paint company, and they have a lot of product specific information because it's a chemical product. And so we looked for some interesting ways to kind of surface that and just design the information so that they could access the product specification. There's, one of those chemical specification documents. So we put a little bit of extra design into the product details section of the product detail page so that information was presented really clearly. It was really easy to consume. It's a lot of tables. It's a lot of like really specific hazard information. And so instead of hiding it behind a downloadable PDF, which is something we also provided still, but we made it like really apparent and kind of nice and easy to consume and then we could formatted it so it was really more like brand oriented. And so it felt like it was information that was coming from a trusted source.
Now there's also breakage, right? When somebody, like, the disconnect between like marketing and UX is when somebody runs an ad for, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
a new shirt or a
Mm-hmm.
new hoodie, and then somebody clicks it, and then they
Mm-hmm.
wind up landing on a completely different landing page with like
Yeah.
just random products. And
Yeah.
it's a big problem,
That
and I
is a
see
big
a lot of
problem.
companies making that mistake.
Yeah.
So the mapping journeys from marketing into the UX and then
Mm-hmm.
UX down the funnel is
Yeah.
super important.
Yeah, that's a really annoying information architecture problem when your marketing team starts throwing up links everywhere and then your UX is like, what is going on with all of these URLs? They aren't mapped to the site. And that can create some really bad customer experiences because if your landing pages or the URLs that your advertising is pointing to are out of context, if they don't have the proper orientation information so that customers can like maneuver around back into your website, you can create really frustrating experiences because maybe they like one thing, but then they kind of see something else in one of your upsell blocks that they like, and then they just kind of get lost, or they can't get back to the landing page because it's not properly site mapped. You can run into lots of problems like that.
This is where these type of practices come in really well.
Yeah.
Like, these are the things that are, forgotten or just not paid attention to. Like you said last time, right? The marketing department was doing their thing, the merchandising is doing their thing, the UX is doing another thing. And so getting that connection between everybody in the mix is super important.
I mean, that's a really important part of part of the digital transformation process internally is I think you have to, a lot of times these teams are new. I mean, a lot of people don't necessarily always know or understand what UX is. Maybe they think it looks a lot like marketing, but it's also visual design. And so where is that limit? I think you have to approach it as not a competition. You have to really set up an internal culture so that the teams feel like they're collaborating. And that's where workshops help, is because you can say like, oh, we want to like design an experience map, or we want to create a service delivery map. And then you can bring those people, like the UX people, they're not taking like, they're using the workshop as a space to give everybody a voice and kind of surface that information about what they're doing and what they're working on. And so it feels more collaborative as opposed to just like coming over and being like, here, marketing, we made an experience map, have fun, start using it, right? You wouldn't want to do something like that. Very top down, very heavy handed. You don't want to make any assumptions about what marketing is doing. You want to find ways to bring them in the room so that they feel like they have an imprint on the conversation.
So one thing that actually is good to remember for majority of these teams is that, to put the egos aside, it's at the end of the day, you're running a business. The business has a purpose that it serves, and the outcome of that purpose is usually making a happy client.
Yes.
So if everybody understands from the get-go that the purpose of this meeting, whatever that meeting is to solve a particular problem so that we can achieve particular goals that at the end of the day give us the outcome of happy clients or more happy clients. Yeah. Then, I think it's very important to set that base at the beginning, right? You keep saying that you're giving people an environment or a platform where everybody can voice their opinions, which is great, but they also need to have context. Like your opinion matters, but in the context of how do we make the customer happy. So I think that's an important case to, for people to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think that can't be emphasized enough. Like, we talk a lot about digital transformation, but what we're really talking about at the heart of digital transformation is building a human-centered business. Like, it's not the way that business is done has changed so much because of technology and online, and people can find just such a wealth of products and experiences. And so if you are just pushing all of your vision out without any consideration for what the customer needs, you're really going to miss the mark. I mean, it's just, in this day and age, I think it's impossible not to use all of these new techniques and these new tools for designing around our customer and getting information from them. It's just really crucial to, I think, having market adoption.
Another thing is that not all businesses are created equal, right? And not all solutions are one size fits all. So it's important that every single major decision that's being made has a lot of different inputs. You have the input from the knowledge base, you have the input from people involved, you have input from the data collected, and obviously from the visionaries and the stakeholders of the business. So putting that all together in a room and being able to dissect through all the opportunities and through all the, cut the fat, as I like to say, and get to the meatiest part of it, that creates the biggest opportunities. So I think discovery workshops, just in general, they're very broad. They can be used in various different topics. They can be used for various different departments, but particularly, within the user experience realm, I think UX is that that central core that keeps the balance between everybody, right? Because UX has to consider everybody's role, from merchandising to logistics to innovation to marketing to customer service, right? So we live in the middle of it all to make sure that there's a right balance of happiness amongst everyone, and so that, and that we could complete the goals to make the clients happy at the end of the day.
Yeah, because so much of UX is honestly internal alignment. I mean, that's a really big part of it, because if your internal teams aren't aligned, you're not going to be able to deliver on that customer experience. It's not going to be consistent. It might be mistargeted to the wrong kind of customer, or you might be targeting different kinds of customers. So that internal alignment is a really crucial part of the UX experience, in my opinion. And that's why facilitation is so often brought up in the context of UX design, is because that's really the linchpin, I think, to making that kind of collaboration happen internally and getting those processes to just run a little bit more smoothly than they maybe have been. Working with people can be hard. And so, anything that you can do to sort of influence how the different groups on a project are collaborating and supporting each other, I think is really important and shows at the end of a project. The other kind of thing that we didn't really talk about with discovery workshops that I should probably touch on are just like having objectives. A discovery workshop should always have like kind of a really broad objective so that everybody understands like this is what we're working towards. It can be something really simple, like kind of like what we talked about earlier, where everybody comes in the room and it's like, okay, the whole environment has changed now. What are some of the new challenges that we're facing? And so, the workshop can be just about that, surfacing new challenges in the post-coronavirus world. Maybe it's more specific, like we see our competitors leveling up on new features. Where is our site falling behind? And so then you can start to surface, like, what do we see our competitors doing? How come we're not doing that? What could we be doing? Are there things we want to build internally? Should we look for third parties to bring that feature in-house? A discovery workshop can be a really great place to start that conversation.
It's also be great that when brands can ask themselves, why do customers work with them, right? That self-check-in. Because sometimes you get, everything's going so well and so smooth, and, companies just relax and like, they love us. So we're just going to keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
This is a great disciplinary approach to ask, bring your team in and ask, why do customers like working with us?
Yes.
Bring to the surface the most important points. Why do they love you? Why do they talk about you? Why do they continue trusting you? Right? Which will also probably surface the things why they don't.
Yeah, totally.
Right? So that can work as like ammo to continuously grow and continuously innovate your brand.
Yep.
Because people can't forget that innovation and constant change is just a must.
Yeah.
You can't be static, especially in the digital world where things are screaming fast.
Yeah.
And so you got competitors on your tail every single day.
Totally.
So like Apple used to like to say, right? We don't want to be first, but we want to be the best, and that's kind of like the mentality everybody should keep. The only way to find out how you can be the best is by finding out why people choose to work with you already.
Yeah, I think that's very true. There's a lot of different sources of data about the customer that those different teams bring to the table. And then, going back to some of the assumptions and biases, like the next phase of that would be to go out and validate that stuff. Like really understand, does our customer see it the same way that we do? Those are very important questions to ask. But I love getting the assumptions and biases out, on the table, get them out, understand what everybody thinks, and really boil it down to what do we think we're doing? What assumptions do we have about our job that are just part of our operating mantra? It's really nice to revisit those sometimes because they bring a lot of presence and grounding by saying it out loud.
And it's nice to bring someone outside of the internal team to actually listen to your biases, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So you can get somebody's perspective that has no connection or no attachment to the company or to the
You're like, oh, I just assumed you were doing that all these months. I had no idea that we were completely not writing copy for this particular kind of customer, I've definitely been in the room where I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't being done. I thought somebody was doing it.
So that could be a topic we could have next time, which is, ownership of the project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah, that would be
Who holds the
fun to
reins?
talk about.
Which is a big topic.
Yeah.
I think we are cutting it close with time. All right.
Okay, cool. All right. Have a lovely weekend. I'll be in touch
Well,
by Monday and let you know.
fantastic.
All right. Bye.